It was a drizzly Tuesday afternoon, the kind that turns windows into soft watercolor and makes a home office feel like a cocoon. I'd just finished annotating a set of elevations when a small banner flickered across the corner of a screen. I wasn't even using the old tablet parked on its charging stand, the one Lily and I mostly ignored except for recipes and airline check-ins. A text preview bloomed and stayed there as if daring me to blink. Any progress getting him to cover the loans? The name above it. Margaret tugged the air out of the room. Before my mind assembled a response, another bubble appeared, time-synced from Lily's phone. Not yet. He's dodging the topic. I'll lock it in before the wedding. Once that's handled, I'm done. There are moments when sound thins and the world becomes blueprint lines, ink edges, white space. I design buildings for a living. Every day is a negotiation between gravity and intention. Those two messages were a crack racing across glass. The first instinct wasn't noble. It was volcanic, an urge to hurl the tablet against the wall, then walk into the living room where Lily was laughing at some sitcom and let fury do the drafting. I didn't move. Instead, a colder dimension slid into place, the way a structural frame steadies after a tremor. Shouting, I realized, is what you do when you're trying to salvage something. This wasn't a salvage. This was a condemnation notice. I picked up the tablet as if it were evidence and placed it on my desk. I photographed the lock screen, then opened the thread and scrolled. Months unfolded. Advice written like stage directions. Margaret suggesting phrases that sounded cooperative and soft. Emphasize our future. Explain how debt shadows a marriage, pivot to teamwork. Let a few tears do the work. Emotion can't. There were notes about timing, wedding planning as ideal cover, late nights as strategic moments, small conflicts to bait apologies into financial promises. Once Lily wrote that she almost felt bad because I was decent and predictable. A follow-up from Margaret arrived within minutes, coaching it away. Decency isn't a shield. Predictability is a lever. A plan doesn't need malice when it has mechanics. My hands were steady as I captured screenshots and emailed them to myself. The room felt clinically bright, as though someone had switched on inspection lights. I could hear the television 2 rooms over, canned laughter lapping at the doorway. The ordinariness of it all made the messages feel more surreal, like a draft set stacked on top of a demolition permit. I poured a glass of water, not because I was thirsty, but because the choreography of normal life protected the edges of the moment. At the lip of the kitchen, I paused and watched the reflection of the window on the hardwood floor. Then I walked to the living room. "Hey, you!" Lily said without looking away from the screen. "You've been quiet. Everything okay?" "Thinking through a project," I said. The words sounded like mine, and not mine, a voiceover on a documentary about someone else's life. She smiled, patted the sofa, and kept watching. I stood for a breath longer than casual, then returned to my office and closed the door. The mind loves narratives where a single conversation untangles the knot. This wasn't that kind of knot. If I confronted Lily now, there would be wide eyes and tremble lip sincerity, a careful blend of apology and confusion, and a promise to explain the language I had just read. Tears might arrive right on cue. The plan would simply adapt like water finding a new path downhill. I looked at the prints pinned to my wall, steel schedules, load paths, notes about lateral forces. Buildings don't fall because of one dramatic failure. They fail because of hidden compromises repeated enough times to become inevitable. I'd spent years making sure other people's homes stayed standing. It was time to protect my own. So I wrote 3 lines in a notebook. Preserve everything. Do not warn the problem. Choose an exit that closes every door behind it. I dated the page and underlined the last sentence. Then I assembled a quiet checklist cloud. Backups, financial accounts, documents only I could access. The small logistics of a life are like fasteners, you don't notice them until you need them to hold. From the living room came another wave of laughter, light and manufactured. I closed my eyes for a second and let the sound pass over me. When I opened them, the shape of the next days had already sketched itself in my mind, clean lines, measured cuts, no shouting. There would be a time to speak. It just wasn't now. The foundation had cracked. The inspection was complete. The site would be cleared in due course. The morning after the messages, the city woke under a pale, rinsed light, the kind that arrives after rain and makes everything look recently installed. I brewed coffee and didn't drink it. I set out 2 mugs the way I always did and didn't carry the second one to the living room. It wasn't spite. It was calibration. Every gesture from here on out would either fortify the structure I needed or weaken it. I started with evidence. The tablet had already given me a vein to mine. Now I treated it like a survey mark, every boundary measure, every slope. I exported the full thread from Lily's phone backup stored in our shared cloud, copied it to an encrypted drive, and sent a digest to an email I used only for contracts. I saved the photos of messages in 3 places and printed a hard set on my office laser printer. Not because paper is magical, but because paper is stubborn and honest. No retractions, no sudden updates, no disappearing acts. On the top page, I stamped the date with my project stamp. Habit, maybe, or ritual. Next, I mapped our finances with a brutality I reserve for crumbling foundations. A spreadsheet grew in clean columns. Mortgage my name, utilities, mine, car title, mine, insurance, mine, vacation charges, my card groceries, mostly mine subscriptions, mixed art supplies, hers gallery, pay, hers modest. I flagged any joint logins and changed passwords where they touched my credit or my business accounts. For our shared services streaming calendar groceries, I left the keys where they were. I didn't want the alarms going off. Not yet. It was mid-morning when I called a lawyer. Not the smooth-talking referral from a client I barely trusted, but Nora Keating, a practical attorney I'd worked with once on a small zoning dispute. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Adrian," she said, her voice crisp and unsentimental as if she were already in court. "What's broken?" "Something personal," I said, "and I need to keep it from spilling into the rest of my life." I summarized only the pieces she needed, no dramatic states and assets and messages. She listened the way engineers listen to wind speeds. 2 questions, she said when I stopped. "Is she on your deed?" "No." "Are you married?" "No, engaged." "Then structurally, your house and accounts are safe, so long as you don't voluntarily push money into her debts or commingle in a way that can be construed as a gift. If you want a list of don'ts, I can send it. Primary risk you doing something generous that looks like a transfer of wealth. So my worst move is to be kind, I said. In this case, yes, she said. If you're asking what I would do, document everything, do not confront in a way that invites manipulation or forces a joint plan on paper. And if you intend to end the engagement, do it cleanly with a clear record that no funds moved. I let the silence expand. Suppose I said I needed to give the truth nowhere to hide. Suppose I wanted both families to know exactly why the engagement ended with no room for revision later. Hypothetically. Then you control the room and the script, Nora said. Keep your temper. Put the evidence in front of neutral witnesses at once. Have your logistics in place before you speak a word. Housing locks belongings access. Don't leave anything for the next day. And Adrian? Yes. Don't improvise, she said. People improvise when they still want to change outcomes. If your outcome is decided, then so is the plan. After we hung up, she emailed me a short memo. 3 paragraphs. No flourish. Confirm sole ownership. Avoid transfers. End engagement in writing. Retain copies of communications. Do not meet alone if you anticipate manipulation. Consider third-party movers. Consider changing credentials. She added a final line. If any threat or harassment follows, call me first. We handle the rest. I printed her email, clipped it to the packet of text messages, and slid everything into a simple craft folder. Then I built a second spreadsheet, not for money, but for events. I named it Site Clearance because I couldn't help myself. Row by row, moving company pack Lily's belongings delivered to a destination I specify same evening. Locks change cylinders after she's out. Garage door codes rotate. Wi-Fi password update after midnight. Streaming and utilities change. Master email. Phone plan. We were not on a family plan. Nothing to do. Storage labeled boxes, room-by-room inventory to avoid accusations of lost items. Restaurant private room that feels ceremonial but not ostentatious. Neutral ground for a reveal. Parents mine and hers invited with a clear but vague reason to ensure attendance. Evidence printed large enough to be read across a table. I gave each item a deadline and a buffer. I overplan for a living. When failure costs lives, you learn to fear assumptions. At noon, Lily walked into my office with half a pear and offered me the larger half. I thanked her and took the smaller. She perched on the edge of the drafting table, legs swinging. You know we should go look at venues again Saturday, she said casually. Mom found a place by the river with lanterns. Saturday is bad, I said, but I'll find something special. For us. I didn't look up from the plan set I wasn't reading. I could feel her eyes on me measuring, adjusting. She left humming. I checked the calendar and blocked out site visit for Saturday anyway. In my industry, site visit is the polite lie that covers 1,000 necessary absences. The moving company was easy. I called a firm I trusted from a museum remodel meticulous bonded used to handling art. The manager remembered me. I booked a crew tentatively for a date I would confirm within 48 hours. I asked them to bring wardrobe boxes, picture crates, foam labels, and a neutral cargo van, no bright logos. Discretion matters when a life is being quietly dismantled. Next locks. A friend from college now ran a small security outfit. He agreed to swing by late the same night. I would need him no questions asked to swap the cylinders and reprogram the garage keypad. He knew me well enough not to pry. I paid his retainer on the spot. For the restaurant, I wanted a space that granted privacy without the drama of a ballroom. I chose a place I'd used once for a donor meeting, a glass-walled room behind the main dining room, soundproofed, lit like a promise. The manager offered a prefix that felt celebratory, asked about a special moment to mark. I told him there might be a brief presentation between the main course and dessert, and requested a single linen envelope placed on a small tray. He asked what would be inside. Paper, I said. He laughed and said that part was up to me. The envelope solved itself in my head while I was on hold with the bank. I asked a banker I knew to prepare a cashier's check for the exact amount of Lily's student loans. Not because I intended to issue it, but because I needed to understand the mechanics and the optics, how it would look, how it would sit inside an envelope, how it would be presented. He explained the process: funds verification, issuance, pickup. I thanked him and said I'd confirm later. Then I opened a design program and created a single-page, print clean and legible, a blown-up screenshot of the message Lily had sent Margaret, stating her plans centered on the sentence that mattered. I printed 3 copies at 200% scale and trimmed them with a steel ruler. On the back of each, I stamped the date again. I slid one into the linen envelope. The restaurant would provide the others into the folder. It would have been easy, so easy to call my parents and tell them everything. My mother would listen without interrupting. My father would arrange his silence into brackets around the few words he chose to say. I didn't call. Not yet. I needed them to hear the story once in sequence, the way a building tour makes sense when you follow the path the architect intended. The hardest part came that evening, the performance. I don't act. My face tends to reflect calculations the way glass reflects weather. But the plan demanded a calm script. We were chopping vegetables when I said casually, "As a handrail, I've been thinking about something you said last week about how debt shadows a life, about starting clean." I let the knife rest, kept my eyes on the board. "I don't want that weight on us." Her spoon paused. "What do you mean?" "I want to take care of it," I said. "Consider it my gift to us." The line felt like a beam seated into exactly the right pocket. I kept my tone mild. "I'm not comfortable just wiring money into a faceless system. I want it to feel meaningful. Let's mark it with our families. I'll have the bank prepare a cashier's check for the full amount. We'll have dinner, and I'll hand it to you properly witnessed, celebrated." Lily's reaction came in waves: surprise, relief, then a trembling that read as gratitude. She stepped into my arms and her voice blurred. She was good. She always had been. And I wondered how many times I had mistaken this same competence for sincerity. She asked whether I was sure. I said I was. She whispered that she didn't deserve me. I said we deserved peace. She called her mother in the hallway, lowering her voice, but not enough. I heard the edges. He's doing it. Dinner. A check. Before the wedding. I kept chopping, measured and steady. In the background, Margaret's squeal came through, tinny and bright, like a smoke alarm briefly tested. After dinner, I washed the dishes and counted backwards from 100 in sevens, a trick an older project manager taught me when inspectors got combative. It reorders the mind and starves dramatic impulses of oxygen. It worked now. Late that night in this office, I sketched a short script for the restaurant moment. No anger, no insults, just the arrangement of facts. I wrote a single sentence to frame the gesture I wasn't going to make and the truth I was going to reveal. Then I wrote the exit line, the one that would end the conversation. I practiced both aloud until the words slid out without tremor. The next day was logistics. I walked through the house with a clipboard and labeled Lily's belongings room by room, not because I owed her the courtesy, but because process protects the person who follows it. Jewelry box with 4 drawers, canvas totes under bed, shoe rack 12 pairs, framed prints 5, sketchbooks stacked twine. I didn't open private notebooks. I wasn't there to humiliate. I was there to clear a site. I drafted an email to the moving company with a final date and a 2-hour window. The subject line read, "Evening Pack Out Private." I CC'd no one. I attached a floor plan with highlights. Then I saved the email as a draft. I would click send from the restaurant hallway when the plates were cleared. Around lunch, Lily texted me photos of table settings and peonies. I heart-reacted where it was safe. She added a list of things she'd need post-wedding: a bigger wardrobe, a climate-controlled storage for art, maybe a dog, maybe a sabbatical to finish a series of paintings. I read each item as if it were a duct in a ceiling map. "It don't argue with it." I replied twice. "Let's look at options, and one thing at a time, because small agreement is anesthesia." That afternoon, I visited my parents under the pretext of dropping off building permits for my father to review something we used to do when I was new to the profession and he was more teacher than retiree. He poured tea and my mother arranged cookies on a plate as if we were all still rehearsing for lives simpler than our own. "How's the planning?" she asked. "Efficient," I said. "We're having a small dinner soon, just us and Lily's parents." I watched their faces the way I watch plaster for hairline cracks. My mother smiled. My father nodded once, a quiet, uncommitted beam. "We'll be there," he said. On the drive home, I rehearsed the route the moving truck would take to avoid neighbors who gossiped, checked the weather-clear skies, and confirmed with the security company the time they would arrive. I had never organized a demolition this intimate. The professional in me admired the choreography. The person in me detested that there had to be choreography at all. 2 days out, Lily grew almost unbearably affectionate. She drafted long late-night texts about gratitude and building a future without weights tied to our ankles. She said she felt lighter just knowing the conversation had shifted. I responded evenly, echoing her words where it smoothed the surface. A part of me, not generous but not cruel, kept wanting to warn her, "Don't do this. Don't show up for what you think is a coronation." That part had no vote. The day before the dinner, I met with the restaurant manager to confirm the room setup. "We'll keep the door closed," he said, "and we can dim the main dining room lights a touch so the glass reads like a mirror. No one will see in." I asked for water on the table, extra napkins, and that the envelope be placed on a dark tray for contrast. He called me meticulous. I said it was my only talent. Walking out, I passed a couple arguing softly at the bar. Their voices rose and fell like wind, and I wondered how many people in that room were living inside stories neither of them recognized. Outside, the sun landed in bright squares on the sidewalk. I stood in one for a minute like a man taking a measurement. In the evening, Lily and I sat with a laptop and built a simple seating chart. She wanted her mother next to me. I put my father there instead, an easy rearrangement I framed as giving our dads a chance to talk shop. She pouted, and then accepted texting Margaret the update with a shrug emoji. I marked it in my head as the smallest of victories. The fewer seconds I spent within arm's reach of Margaret, the better for everyone's heart rates. Night settled. I made a final pass through the checklists. The moving crew's email was still a draft. The locks appointment sat in my calendar as built update. The security codes were written on a sticky note inside a book only I would pull from the shelf. I placed the craft folder in my leather portfolio and the envelope with the printed message in an inner pocket. I set out the suit I'd wear and polished my shoes because polish is confidence you can prove in a mirror. In bed, Lily curled against me and whispered that she'd never forget what I was about to do. "No matter what happens in our life," she said, "this will be the moment I point to and say, 'That's when I knew.'" I stared at the dark ceiling and felt something unfamiliar, not doubt but grief for the version of us I had believed existed. It was a silent grief, private and orderly, the kind that moves a few inches each hour and then is finished. I let it pass through. Morning found me clear and sharpened. I answered 3 client emails, revised a roof detail, and signed a change order because ordinary work keeps the edges of an extraordinary day from cutting your hands. Lily texted heart-eyed emojis and a photo of her dress for the dinner. Margaret sent through her daughter unsolicited menu advice. I ignored it. I phoned the banker and confirmed nothing. At 4, my father called to ask if the dress code was formal or architect formal, which in our family means navy and understatement. I told him the latter. He chuckled, a sound I hadn't heard since childhood. My mother texted that she was bringing a card. I thanked her and turned the phone face down on the desk. At 5, I hit send on the email to the moving company. At 5:03, the manager replied with a simple "confirmed" and a list of the crew. At 5:15, the locksmith texted "on standby." At 5:30, I placed the folder in the passenger seat and drove toward the restaurant, feeling the quiet consolidation that precedes the first swing of a wrecking ball. Lily was already there when I arrived, radiant in a way that would have charmed me once. She kissed me on the cheek and whispered, "Thank you for believing in us." I smiled the way professionals smile at ribbon cuttings, gracious and brief. Our parents arrived within minutes, my mother with her card, my father with his stillness, Margaret with her theater, and Lily's father with a bewildered politeness that tried to wear optimism like a tie. The manager led us to the glass room. The table shone, the envelope waited on its tray clean as a verdict. We took our seats. Menus rustled. Wine found its way into glasses. Across the table, Margaret's eyes flicked to the envelope again and again, an investor counting profits before the market closes. I rested my hand on the leather portfolio at my side and felt the heft of paper and the calm of preparation. The room was a chamber tuned for truth. I had built it beam by beam. When the main course plates were cleared, I glanced at the manager and nodded once. He dimmed the lights a fraction. The conversation lilted and then settled. I stood, not dramatically, not slowly, just with the efficient economy of a man who knows where every stair is in the dark. "Thank you all for being here," I said, voice level, the script unspooling inside my chest with the inexorable logic of load paths. There's something important I want to do before dessert. And then the moment I had designed for the hinge on which everything would swing began. "Thank you all for being here," I said, palms resting lightly on the back of my chair. "There's something important I want to do before dessert." The room gentled itself. Cutlery settled. The glass walls behind us turned the dining room into a dim reflection, our faces floating over a scatter of other tables. In front of me, the linen envelope lay centered on its small black tray like a ceremonial object. I lifted it. Across the table, Margaret's eyes flashed the quick arithmetic of a person already spending money that hasn't arrived. I looked at Lily last. She was luminous, shoulders bare, a soft sheen on her skin. If this had been a different life, I might have memorized the angle of her jaw, the way I memorize a north facade. "Lily," I said, "when people start a life together, they usually inherit each other's joys and burdens. I don't want debt to follow us into our first year." So I paused just long enough to let the promise bloom in the room. As my gift, I came prepared to lift that weight. My mother exhaled in a small, proud sound. John, Lily's father, patted my shoulder twice with unquestioning approval. Margaret interlaced her fingers and pressed her lips together as if straining to contain triumph. Lily's eyes brightened. Her hand rose toward her mouth as though to stifle a sob she wanted everyone to witness. I slid a single sheet from the envelope, turned it so it faced her, and placed it in the exact center of the table. It wasn't a check. The paper was thick and bright, and the lines on it were precise, a blown-up screenshot of Lily's message to her mother 2 weeks earlier. The sentence I had centered, "Once that's handled, I'm done," ran across the page like a fault line. Sound left the room in a clean sweep. In the din beyond the glass, waiters carried plates, and someone laughed too loudly at something trivial. Inside our sealed box, even the air seemed to crystallize. Lily's smile collapsed inch by inch like a balcony giving way without a sound before the final drop. She stared at the page, blinked, and then lifted her face to me, lips parting, voice forming a syllable that never arrived. Margaret's composure cracked faster. Her eyes darted to John, then to me, calculating what story might still be told. My father didn't move. My mother's hand slid from her wine glass to her lap as if she'd remembered suddenly that breakable things belong on the table. "This," I said, calm and precise, "is why there won't be a check. This is why there won't be a wedding." Margaret's chair scraped a fraction. "Adrian," she began, coding my name in sugar. "I don't know what that is, but..." I raised a hand slightly, the way I stop a subcontractor from talking over a safety instruction. "It's your conversation with Lily," I said. "Guidance on how to make her debt my obligation. Coaching on timing, phrases to use, and most notably a script for leaving me once the transfer is complete." Lily's head shook in small, hard motions. That's not Adrian, please. It's not what it looks like. It looks like words, I said. Like your words. To your mother. I have the thread. I have the dates. I have months of messages. I reached into my portfolio and set 2 tidy stacks on the table, copies of the most explicit portions of the exchange timestamps, clean contact headers visible. I slid one toward my parents, one toward John. I didn't pass anything to Margaret. She could read over someone's shoulder. John's fingers trembled as he lifted the first page. He was a man who preferred to outsource unpleasant details. Now the details were screaming. My father took the packet like a man accepting a set of structural drawings after a collapse, curious, unsurprised, already mapping load paths of blame and consequence. My mother's mouth drew into a narrow, uncharacteristic line that said more than outrage could. Lily found words. I never meant it was a stupid joke. I was venting. Mom got in my head. You know me. Tears gathered on schedule, a well-timed storm front. The problem, I said, is that I do know you. At least I know the version of you who wrote things like use wedding tasks as cover and tears help the pivot to teamwork. I know the version of you who called me decent and predictable as if those were levers on a machine. I kept my voice level. Anger was unnecessary. Physics would handle the rest. Margaret leaned forward, elbows on the linen diamond, catching the light. We are talking about a young couple trying to navigate finances, she said smoothly. Was some of it dramatic? Sure, everyone gets overwhelmed before a wedding, but calling off a marriage over a few out-of-context messages. That seems punitive. I met her gaze. I'm not punishing anyone, I said. I'm refusing to fund a plan that requires my humiliation to succeed. John turned a page, his eyes scanning, then snagging on the line about staying a year to make it look good. The color ebbed from his face as the practicalities arranged themselves in his mind, the dinner, the envelope, the sudden surgically composed alternative. He looked at Lily, then at Margaret, as if both were strangers speaking a language he only pretended to know. Adrian, Lily said, voice thin, pleading. I love you. I panicked about the future. Mom pushed. I said things I didn't mean. Please, we can talk. Let's go outside and… No, I didn't raise my volume. I didn't need to. We won't be going anywhere together after this. The engagement is over. You will not step foot in my house again. Your belongings are being packed as we speak. I placed a slim labeled envelope on the table in front of her. Here is an inventory list and the tracking number for the delivery to your parents' address. Arrival by 10 tonight. She stared at the envelope as if it might bite. You had movers touch my things. I hired professionals who preserve art for a living, I said. Your sketchbooks are cradled in foam. Your earrings are taped in their tray. Your framed prints are in picture crates. There is a signature chain with photos at pickup and drop-off. If any item is missing, we will reconcile it with the inventory. Margaret's lashes fluttered. This is outrageous. You blindsided our family in public. You're in a private room, I said. And the blindsiding happened weeks ago when your private plans treated me as an obstacle to be maneuvered, not a partner to be trusted. For a moment, no one spoke. Plates cooled their sauces, turning dull. My father cleared his throat just enough to be heard. He only said my name, Adrian, but it carried the exact approval a builder hears when the inspector signs off without adding a single note. My mother reached into her bag, slid the card she had brought back inside, and folded her hands in her lap as if folding a flag. John set the packet down in front of him with quiet care. Margaret, he said to his wife, voice exposed, did you tell our daughter to do this? Margaret didn't answer. She was deciding which personality to wear, the indignant mother or the wounded hostess. She chose indignant. I guided a conversation about starting a marriage without debt, she said. That he's twisting it into a con is… I'm not twisting anything, I said, I'm quoting. The manager appeared at the door with the faint, alert smile of a man trained to read rooms. I lifted 2 fingers an inch from the tabletop, not now, and he vanished. I looked at Lily. Keys in garage fob, I said. She blinked, confused, as if the directness itself were violence. Slowly, with the robotic movements of a person waking inside a nightmare, she reached into her clutch and placed a small ring of metal and a single black fob on the linen. The metallic sound, soft as it was, rang like a hammer strike. Thank you, I said, and slid them into my pocket. I've also removed your profile from the door lock app and cleared your code from the garage panel. Tears spilled, now real ones. Perhaps she had a right to them. Grief, even for a ruined plan, is still grief. She reached for my wrists across the table. I stepped back and her hands found only air. "We can fix this," she whispered, desperate. "We can start over." It was stupid. It was just words. "I never took anything from you." "You were about to," I said. Words are the blueprint. Money was the poured concrete. I looked to the manager at the door, nodded once, and set my card on the tray he offered. "Please wrap up the bill," I said. "Split nothing. The evening's on me." Margaret made a scoffing sound, moral outrage on clearance. "You humiliate our daughter and then try to look generous." "I'm closing the tab," I said, "not the wound." I turned to my parents. "Mom, Dad, shall we?" My mother stood at once, lifting her coat with economy. My father rose a moment later, sliding his chair in silently, the way he used to put away his tools. No scrape, no clatter. John half rose as if to stop us, then sank back, hollowed by the shape of a conversation he should have had months ago in his own kitchen. Lily's voice reached me as I moved to the door. "Adrian, please. Please don't walk away." I paused with my hand on the handle. Not for drama, just to choose the right sentence. "I'm not walking away," I said. "I'm stepping off a structure that never had a foundation." We left. In the corridor outside the glass room, the restaurant returned as a familiar noise, silver on porcelain, the murmur of other people's evenings. I took out my phone, opened the draft to the moving company, and tapped send. Then I texted the locksmith go. Both replies came in under 30 seconds. Choreography executed. At the host stand, I thanked the manager. "If anyone asks," I said, "tell them we appreciated the discretion." His eyes flicked once to the glass room where 5 figures sat in tableau, the kind of frozen moment he'd recollect later when the kitchen staff told end-of-night stories. "Of course," he said softly. On the sidewalk, the night had sharpened. My mother threaded her arm through mine. "Home?" she asked. "Home," I said. My father walked on my other side without touching me, a silent flank. "Well done," he said after half a block, and nothing else because there was nothing else required. In the car, my phone began to ring and ring. Lily's name, then a new unknown number, then Margaret, then John. I let them stack as if they belonged to a different person. Texts spilled in next. "You're cruel. Please just talk to me. You don't understand. We can fix this. Answer your fiancé." The last message used a word that didn't exist anymore. I placed the phone face down and drove. By the time we reached my house, the moving cruise van was already idling across the street, white and anonymous. 3 workers in quiet uniforms stood by the gate, glancing up at the windows, the way art handlers glance at skylights, aware of light, of weather, of gravity. I shook the manager's hand and walked him through the inventory, then stepped aside and let them do the careful work of unmaking a life. They moved as if the house had asked for silence. Inside, I gathered what had always been mine. A quiet, a clear desk, the feeling of floors that answer only to my steps. In Lily's office, canvases leaned against the wall like statements not yet made. I watched them wrapped one by one, foam corners kissing mitered frames. No malice in the room, no revenge, only competent hands, labels, zip ties, tape. When the last box rolled down the driveway, I signed the chain of custody form and photographed it. The van pulled away without fanfare, its taillights smearing briefly red against the dark. 5 minutes later, the security truck turned in. My friend's tech swapped cylinders with the casual speed of a person who does this 24 times a week and understands that speed itself is a kindness. We reprogrammed the garage keypad. I deleted Lily's access from the app. He left me 3 new keys, smooth and cold. I made tea. I don't drink tea late. It bothers my sleep. I drank it anyway because I wanted the simple chemistry hot water leaves time. At the table, my phone hummed with a final voicemail blocked number. I let it sit until the kettle cooled. When I pressed play, Lily's voice filled the kitchen, wet, ragged. "Adrian, I'm begging you," she said. "Please. I made a horrible mistake. Mom pushed me. I panicked. I love you. I'm going to your parents' house. They love me. They'll make you listen." Then a click, as if she had braced herself on the fact of her own determination. I forwarded the message to my parents and typed, "She may come by. Please don't engage alone. I'll be there in the morning." Before I could press send, my father replied with a single sentence, "Let her come." I stared at the words at their simple weight. Not bravado, not threat. the calm of a man who knows how to walk through a building and point to the beams that are cracked and to the ones that are sound. I texted Nora my attorney reveal finished. No funds moved, belongings delivered. She may approach my parents. We'll keep you posted. She responded in under a minute. Good. Document any contact. Sleep if you can. I powered off the phone and stood at the back door with the lights off. The yard sat black and exact, the hedges a series of firm shapes. In the distance, a train horn stitched the night long and then longer. I thought about the sentence on the printed page, the one that had made everything so clear. Plans are just words until you put steel behind them. Tonight, steel did its job. Upstairs, the closet had a gap where Lily's dresses used to hang. The absence was visual, not emotional, negative space on a wall. I set the suit I'd worn back on its wooden hanger, picked a speck of lint from the lapel, and put my shoes away. The ordinary order of objects soothed me the way a level resting true calms a nervous apprentice. In bed, I could have replayed the evening, could have adjusted line readings in the theater of my mind. I didn't. I let the architecture of what was finished hold itself. Before sleep found me, I wrote one last note in the small notebook on my nightstand. Reveal executed with witnesses. No transfer, no promise of transfer. Keys fob recovered. Access revoked. Delivery en route, inventory logged. Anticipate attempt at parental manipulation. I capped the pen, closed the book, and turned off the lamp. Morning would bring a knock at my parents' door. And when it did, I knew something with the clean certainty I reserve for steel and concrete. It would not be a negotiation. It would be a structural inspection conducted by a man who taught me to see the difference between a hairline crack you can caulk and a fatal flaw you must never build on. Saturday came with square, honest light. I was measuring a window jamb for a client when my phone buzzed. Dad, she's here. Then a second message. Putting you on speaker. I heard the doorbell through the open line. Then my mother's voice, polite, room temperature. Good morning, Lily. I'm so sorry to drop by. Lily rushed, breathy and wet. I need to explain before this goes any further. Adrian is throwing away everything over a misunderstanding. My father's step sounded in the entry. He didn't raise his voice. He never needs to. Nothing is being thrown away, Lily, he said. We're refusing to stack more weight on a cracked footing. That is not waste. That is prudence. I was venting, she said. Mom pushed me. I was scared about money. I love your son. Fear explains poor choices, my father replied. It does not convert a plan into an accident. You wrote about timing your tears using the wedding as cover and leaving after a year to make it look tidy. That's not venting. That's drafting. Silence hummed. Through the phone, I could picture the exact geometry, Lily in the doorway. My mother's hand on the knob, my father set square in the hall like a brace. Lily tried again. You know me, she said. You've seen us together. I would never hurt him. You already did, my father said. And you're still attempting to. You failed to steer Adrian, so you came to steer us. We are not a bypass around his judgment. Gravel in the driveway. A second chime. My mother opened the door again, and a gust of 3 people arrived, John in front, shoulders anxious. Margaret a step behind, face arranged for sympathy. Thank you for seeing us. John began words too quick. This has spiraled. Emotions are high. Lily said some foolish things in texts. There's no need to destroy a relationship over a written plan to extract money, my father asked, mild as a level bubble. John, I read the messages. So did my wife. So did your son. Margaret glided forward. I guided my daughter through anxiety, she said. If you pull lines out of context, anyone looks ugly. My mother spoke for the first time. The context, she said, was 2 months of coaching. There will be no rescue here, my father added. Not from us, not in this entryway, not by trying to make strategy sound like support. John tried on indignation. This is getting legalistic. We're family. Can't we keep lawyers out of it? That depends, my father said. And now the steel entered. Adrian's attorney walked us through the language for conspiracy to defraud. If harassment continues, or if any attempt is made to damage his standing or business, the next conversation is not on this porch. It is with counsel, and if necessary, an investigator who will request your phones and bank records to learn who knew what and when. John stopped speaking. Margaret's mouth compressed along an invisible seam. Lily shifted tactics. I can pay him back, she blurted. We can set terms. You never received $1, my father said. There is nothing to return. There is only a door you will not be crossing." She stared at him, tears drying into a shine. "You would shut me out after all the dinners, the holidays, Dinners and holidays aren't collateral," my mother said. "They were hospitality, and they end at the threshold where trust ends." My father concluded, as he concludes a sight walk with a checklist. "Here are the boundaries," he said. "You will not call or text Adrian. You will not come here again. You will not contact us except through an attorney. If you violate any of this, we will file for a protective order. Do you understand?" Lily didn't answer. John nodded because the word order had finally registered as more than tone. Margaret inhaled to object, then thought better of it. "Then I suggest you talk among yourselves," my father said, stepping back. Outside, the door closed. Through the phone, the next minutes were a tangle in the driveway, voices too hot for sentence structure. John accusing Margaret of overplaying Margaret, snapping about a simple plan, made complex Lily keening a thin line between them. A car door slammed. Another. Tires bit gravel. Then quiet, our family's kind of quiet, deliberate and breathable. My father picked up the phone. "Still with us." "I'm here," I said. "The visitor center is closed," he said. "How's your side?" "Locked log delivered," I said. "Good," he replied. "Come by this afternoon. Your mother wants to feed you something that requires no decisions." We hung up. I stood at my own back door and watched the maple leaves shift in a breeze so slight it barely existed. The relief wasn't triumph. It was removal. You don't celebrate when scaffolding comes down. You notice you can see the sky again. By noon, the messages began to arrive from other directions. John texted me a tight paragraph. "I apologize for my part. I did not understand the extent. We will not contact you again." It read like something composed after a call to a private banker. 10 minutes later, a longer email from Lily, sincere, elaborately sincere warfare by confession, ended with a plea to rebuild trust in therapy. I archived it without replying. Margaret predictably tried one last angle, a performative apology forwarded to my mother with 4 people BCC'd. My mother ignored it with the lethal grace I've seen her reserve for burnt coffee and poor manners. By evening, a friend who works near the gallery texted that Lily's shift had ended early and that she'd left with a box. "Boss looked grim," he wrote. "Not my business, but are you okay?" I sent a thumbs up. "You don't gossip about a structure you've just taken down." That night, I walked through my house and felt the weight distribution return to normal. The closet breathed. The office had an extra foot of hush. I emptied a drawer and found 3 of Lily's hair ties looped together like a small chain. I set them in the delivered box with the rest of the stragglers. Clean exits are made of small mercies. I slept hard and woke to a message from Nora, confirming no funds moved, belongings delivered. Boundaries stated with witnesses. If anyone resurfaces forward directly, do not engage. I replied with a single word, confirmed. In the days that followed, the news filtered in, the way news from a closed site always does, through neighbors of neighbors. John had paused payments Lily depended on. There were arguments at the Hart house audible from the street. Margaret was seen leaving with a suitcase. I did not cheer for any of it. Collapse has victims even when it is earned. I took my craft folder from the safe and moved it to a thinner envelope. Evidence once acted upon becomes archive. I slid the envelope behind a set of books about bridges and made a simple note in my notebook, project closed. On the first Sunday after I drove to the coast and walked the breakwater where the stones shoulder one another without mortar, each one shaped by pressure and time, until it belongs. I stood at the end and looked back at the line, no cement, no glue, still holding because the fit is honest. Somewhere far inland, someone might have been rewriting a story, turning plan into misunderstanding, swapping leverage for love. That was none of my concern. I had my own language again. Span load brace bearing, the words you use when you intend to build. On the drive home, I said out loud just once to myself and to the empty passenger seat the only verdict that mattered. Enough. No gavel. No parade. Just clear ground where something false used to stand, and the useful quiet that follows when you stop testing a floor that will never carry weight. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.